So it is, let's reconvene. It is my absolutely great pleasure to introduce Amory Lovins. Physicist Dr. Amory Lovins is the co-founder and chairman emeritus of the Rocky Mountain Institute, and I think well known to many of us in the audience. He's been an adjunct professor at Stanford, and in fact, I most recently heard him present at a wonderfully inspiring talk that was organized in a seminar series by John Wyant, one of our panelists. He's advised an astounding number of firms in an amazing number of countries over a half century, 31 books authored, which is astonishing to me, and 700 papers, which is perhaps even more astonishing. Relevant to some of our discussions today, he's helped to design super efficient buildings, including notably his own house, but also other commercial and other industrial products. He's got a bunch of honorary doctorates and has deservedly won a number of the world's leading energy environment awards. With many thanks, I would like to welcome Dr. Amory Lovins to give our keynote for this 2021 Austin Electricity Conference. Amory, please take it away. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can you now see my screen okay?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Very good. Well, thank you for the honor of reporting some energy and electricity surprises from the US and elsewhere. I'm going to take General Eisenhower's wise advice to make tough problems soluble by expanding their boundaries to encompass more options and more synergy so they include what the solution requires. There's all four energy-using sectors, transport, buildings, industry, and electricity, save more energy faster together than separately. And all four kinds of innovation, not just technology, but also design, not only public policy, but also new business strategy, can combine to create deeply disruptive game changers while old industries are still putting on their boots. Ford's auto industry, Edison's electricity industry, and Rockefeller's oil industry together changed the world. If Ford and Edison took a very long nap on one of their car camping holidays together and woke up and saw their businesses today, they would recognize almost everything except the electronics. Yet their industries now face vast disruptions as 21st century technology and speed collide head on with 20th and even 19th century institutions, rules, and cultures. And now the first two of these three great industries, autos and electricity, are coming together to eat the third, oil, or actually all hydrocarbons. As we might imagine, Ford mischievously muttering to Edison, let's see what happens when electricity displaces gasoline. Then those electric cars add flexibility and cheap distributed storage and make batteries cheap for all, helping the grid integrate variable solar and wind power so distributed renewables replace giant power stations and their fossil fuels. Let's start, as we always should, with efficient use. Saved energy is already the world's biggest energy source. Just the energy saved worldwide since 1990 now supports more energy services than oil does. About 2/3 of those savings come from smarter technologies and practices, 1/3 from structural and a little behavioral change. For example, if the United States total primary energy demand had kept growing in lockstep with GDP since 1975, we would have used this much energy. Instead, we cut that use by more than half, saving cumulative energy equivalent to 25 years of current use. Meanwhile, the renewable energy output doubled, yet with 28 times less cumulative impact than the savings. Renewables get virtually all the headlines because they're visible, while energy is invisible, and the energy you don't use is almost unimaginable. Yet in, say, 2010 to 16, the world's saved energy avoided 3 times as much CO2 as all the growth in renewable and nuclear output. Another bit of history, around 1975, US government and industry all said that energy productivity, the real GDP produced per unit of primary energy used, could never go up. A year later, I heretically suggested it could rise 257% in the next 50 years. So far, it's risen 154% in 44 years. Yet just the innovations already added by 2010 can raise energy productivity by another threefold, twice what I originally thought, at a third the real cost. And today that's looking conservative because optimizing buildings, vehicles, and factories as whole systems, not as piles of parts, can often make very big energy savings cost less than small or no savings, turning diminishing returns into increasing returns. This paper, free online, just search on the title with a fun 4-minute video abstract, explains why making energy savings several-fold bigger can actually cost less because it uses not more but fewer devices and not fancier but simpler devices, more artfully chosen, combined, timed, and sequenced. Metal ore bodies and oil reservoirs are finite and depletable assemblages of atoms, but energy efficiency resources are infinitely expandable assemblages of ideas, depleting only stupidity, a very abundant resource. A few examples. My wife Judy and I live here at 7,100 feet elevation in Old Snowmass near Aspen, Colorado, where temperatures used to dip as low as minus 47 F, and we've seen 39 days of continuous midwinter cloud. But our house does no combustion. That's so 20th century. Super insulation, ventilation, heat recovery, and big super windows insulating like 16 or even 22 sheets of glass, but looking like 2 and costing less than 3, make this building 99% passive solar heated, 1% active solar. Super efficiency added less construction cost than eliminating the heating system subtracted. So we saved altogether 99% of space and water heating energy, 90% of household electricity, and half the water, altogether with a 10-month payback in 1983. Today's technologies are better and cheaper. The central atrium behind me, seen here in a February snowstorm, has so far produced 77 passive solar banana crops. Someone said I have really big earphones. And our house has helped inspire several 100,000 European passive buildings that likewise have no heating and roughly normal construction cost. The Bangkok version saved 90% of the air conditioning energy with better comfort and normal construction cost. And nearly everyone on Earth lives in a climate somewhere between those of Bangkok and Old Snowmass. But wherever you live, integrative design gives many benefits from each expenditure. So the white arch you see behind me or up at the top of the upper middle photo has 12 different functions, but it has only one cost. We used integrative design in 2010 to retrofit the Empire State Building, saving 38% of its energy, later 43% with a 3-year payback. This was considered pretty good until 3 years later, our cost-effective Denver retrofit saved 70%, making the century-old federal complex more efficient than what was then the best new US office, which in turn is only a third as efficient as RMI's passive net positive, no mechanicals innovation center 10 minutes from here. And now there's a Bavarian building using 2/5 less than ours. So its 3 stories are powered nearly 5 times over by just its rooftop photovoltaics. Yet all of these technologies existed over a decade ago. What's mainly improved, doubling new and old offices' potential efficiency targets in 5 years, is not technology so much as design, the way we choose, combine, time, and sequence technologies. So how did our retrofit save 2/5 of the Empire State Building's energy? Well, remanufacturing its 6,514 windows on site in a temporary window factory set up on a vacant floor into super windows that pass light but block heat, plus better lights, office equipment, air handlers, and so on, cut the maximum cooling load by a third, and then renovating smaller chillers instead of adding bigger chillers saved $17 million of capital costs, paying for most of those improvements and cutting the payback to 3 years or under 1 year if we had counted non-energy benefits to the owner or tenants. A big energy service company using disintegrated design had offered the same 3-year payback with only a sixth the savings we got. they lost the bid. And now the owner is going back with even better integrated design to save another 40%. Of the 20 most efficient commercial buildings in North America, RMI's Innovation Center, you just saw, was the most efficient in the 2 coldest climate zones, using 1/6 of the median US office energy. It keeps people cooled by 11 and warmed by 10 passive methods, none of which blows hot or cold air at you. My favorite space is the 270 square foot Nega Mechanicals room, where I want to sneak in one night and outline on the floor in yellow industrial tape like bodies at a crime scene where the boilers and chillers were supposed to go before we designed them all out. We expect that buildings cost premium, mostly soft costs, and under 4-year payback would drop to about 0 with experience, as has happened with good passive buildings in Germany. In Europe, industrializing mass retrofits to net zero energy and streamlining their finance and soft costs is now getting cheap enough to finance entirely from saved energy while extending building life and improving amenity, health, and value. This whole retrofit has even been demonstrated to be installable in a single day while you're off at work. And now similar methods are expected to cut energy costs 80% in 9 old Brooklyn apartment buildings. And RMI's Realize collaboration with DOE and California Energy Commission is adapting such methods to the US, starting in California and Massachusetts. In Muggy, India, Rohan Parikh's team built 1.5 million square meters of offices using 80% less energy than normal with 10 or 20% lower construction cost, yet superior comfort and satisfaction. Glare-free lighting, as you see on the right, is delivered throughout that big floor plate by contract. If workers complain of glare and demand blinds, then the architect doesn't get paid. Whatever exists is possible. IPCC reported 7 years ago that among European new buildings on the left and retrofits on the right, with bigger savings in both graphs toward the right, the best projects saved up to at least 90% of their energy without costing more per unit of saved energy. Many projects, as you see, cost far more by not adopting the best practices shown by those down near the axis, and the difference is a business opportunity. About a decade after those buildings, new techniques are emerging. For example, purely radiative cooling, it turns out, can keep people comfortable outdoors in humid Singapore at 90+ Fahrenheit without moving, drying, or cooling the air. Instead, in a shaded but open-ended pavilion like a bus stop shelter, this experiment cooled people just by absorbing far infrared radiation from their bodies into vertical panels cooled by surface tubes circulating slightly cooled water. And to prevent convection to and condensation from ambient air, the front of the panel is shielded by an air gap 50 micron polyethylene film, transparent to 82% of the infrared that your body radiates. So as the extended psychrometric chart shows, mean radiant temperatures around 73 to 77 F delivered to the panel as cool water, not very cool, can deliver comfort up to at least 90 F ambient at 80% relative humidity. I expect passive radiant roof panels could deliver that modest 13 to 17 F of cooling, so we can probably air condition cars, which are solar ovens on wheels, passively, say in Corpus Christi. What about home appliances, especially to get off gas? Well, this Swiss fist-size high-speed heat pump can deliver 6 to 15 units of hot water per unit of electricity. And this dramatically more efficient, safe, and otherwise superior Swiss electric cooking system uses vacuum insulated pots to cook with 2.5 to 4+ times less electricity than induction cooktops use. In the US by 2050, at historically reasonable speed, buildings which use 3/4 of electricity can become 3 or 4 times more efficient, saving $1.4 trillion net present value with a 33% internal rate of return. So those savings are worth 4 times their costs. And industry can accelerate too, doubling its energy productivity with a 21% IRR. Indeed, industrial process heat and heavy transport are not uniquely hard to decarbonize, just differently hard, and can even do so profitably, as my new RMI and forthcoming MIT Sloan Management review papers will show. Now, industry uses half the world's energy and electricity dominantly to make stuff. But I found that smarter structural design can profitably save at least half the world's cement and steel that now release 15% of CO2. For example, substituting tension for compression structures typically gives better strength, aesthetics, and cost with about 1/8 the tons. Fabric forms permit optimal shapes that can save over half the concrete in beams, sheets, and other common shapes to deliver the same or better strength and stiffness. And then those weight savings compound because you need less strength to hold up less weight. This folded concrete roof, pre-stressed with carbon fiber, is just 1.6 inches thick, but replaces a 12-inch steel and concrete slab, costs less, and saves 80% of the materials, or 76% redesigned as a floor slab with live loads. It can also help to fit 3 stories with unchanged ceiling height into the vertical space of 2, saving even more structure. This rendering of an airy bridge shows how 3D printing can eliminate most of the weight of concrete structures that mostly support their own weight. This beautiful stainless steel bridge was 3D printed. Next, substitute natural composites like wood, already in 85-meter towers, planned for 350 meters in seismic Tokyo. Add carbon fiber to save much of the wood or concrete. Apply Taiheyo's carbon-neutral bamboo concrete, perhaps even adopt carboxylate chemistries to make cement a net absorber of CO2. Producing industries remaining cement, steel using green hydrogen, and other materials can adopt not just cleaner, but also super efficient processes and equipment. For example, RMI's latest $50-odd billion worth of industrial redesigns typically found about 30 to 60% energy savings on retrofit, paying back in a few years and far outperforming the brown zone in the upper left, where most energy service companies deliver disintegrated design. Our new build projects generally found about 40 to 90-odd% savings with lower than normal capital costs. These are both across a wide range of old and new industries. Here's one of those data points. Paul Westbrook and I co-led the redesign of Texas Instruments' new semiconductor wafer fab to use 40% less energy with 30% or $230 million lower construction cost. So it got built in Richardson, Texas, not in China. Its system efficiencies eliminated one of the 2 utility floors. As of 2017, it had inspired cutting the company-wide TI chip-making energy intensity by 62%, water 56%, greenhouse gases 57%. RMI's next wafer fab design, by the way, showed how to save about 2/3 of its energy use, not counting tool improvements, and half its capital cost, while replacing all 22,000 tons of chillers with any of 3 natural cooling methods that can yield upwards of 100 units of cooling per unit of electricity. Just better pipe and duct design, saving about 80 or 90% of friction and therefore pump and fan power, could, if fully deployed, save roughly half the world's coal-fired electricity, with paybacks typically under a year in retrofit and instant in new build. But this isn't yet in any standard engineering textbook, official study, engineering forecast, industry forecast, or climate model. Why not? Because it's not a technology, it's a design method. And few people yet think of design as a scaling vector, a way to make things big fast. To wring out friction, we simply use big pipes and small pumps, not small pipes and big pumps. And to eliminate elbows, 90-degree angles and their friction, we lay out the pipes first, then the equipment, laying out supply pipes as if they were drains. We bend minds, not pipes. So what does such savings mean for the 3/5 of global electricity that's used in motors? Half of that to run pumps and fans. Well, in a typical pumping system, from the fuel burned at the power plant to the end use, many successive losses compound. So only 1/10 of the energy in the fuel comes out the pipe as flow. But now turn those compounding losses around backwards into compounding savings from right to left, and every unit of flow or friction you save in the pipe saves 10 units of fuel cost, emissions, and global weirding back at the power plant. And as you go back upstream, the components get smaller and cheaper, so the total capital cost goes down. Then we can make the drive systems, the motor systems, 80 or 90% smaller and at least twice as efficient by a whole system retrofit using not just the usual 2 improvements, but 35, of which 28 are free byproducts of the first 7. And you end up saving several fold more drive energy at about 1/5 the unit cost. Even with limited integrated design, US electricity use could shrink 25% by 2050, despite all electric autos with a 2.6-fold bigger GDP. This quadrupled electric efficiency would cost 1/10 our current price of electricity. It would cost on average under 1 cent per kilowatt hour. That vast overhang of unbought efficiency holds at risk many power plant fuel and grid investments, and indeed would do the same to many of the investments proposed in the Princeton study Eric described, because it had only exogenous efficiency, not competed against supply. And they ended up with 2 to 4 times the 2050 US electricity use that our analysis did for essentially the same GDP. It's within a few percent, because we looked really thoroughly at efficiency, and their study made some very simple, moderate assumptions, which rather disappointed me because Princeton has a fabulous heritage of pathfinding work in efficiency. But I think a lot of the challenges that showed up in their very granular supply side analysis flowed from needing 2 to 4 times as much electricity as we found, and we didn't anywhere near buy as much efficiency as was worth buying. Now, the same whole system design that we apply in buildings and industry can also make cars several fold more efficient, making electrification faster and cheaper. Most of the energy needed to move a car is caused by its weight, and saving 1 unit of electricity at the wheels leverages 5 or 6 units of fuel saved in the tank, because you don't need to waste 4 or 5 units getting that energy to the wheels. So this carbon fiber electric car that I drive made money from the first unit off the assembly line 8 years ago. Its carbon fiber was paid for by needing fewer batteries to move less weight. Fewer batteries also recharge faster. An integrated design makes saved weight snowball far more than other automakers assumed. The assembly is also radically frugal, helping again to pay for the carbon fiber. And this method of manufacturing eliminates the conventional body and paint shops, the hardest, costliest steps in making a car. It's much better for workers. Its quadrupled efficiency, equivalent to 124 miles a gallon, is uncompromised and brings many driver benefits. Analyzing auto efficiency by the part, not by the vehicle, which is the way we buy it, conceals most of this opportunity to save several times more energy more cheaply than current official policy and regulation assume. 2 hypercars plan to enter the market late this year. Disclosure, I advise both these firms, will change the game again. Most drivers will not need to recharge this 2-seat electric 3-wheeler because its topside solar cells capture enough energy to drive about 20 to 40 miles a day. It's as if your present car magically added 2 gallons of fuel to its tank every day you park it outside. To make a long road trip, you can quickly recharge the batteries with household electricity for ranges up to 1,000 miles. My BMW and Tesla electric cars outside are among the most efficient now sold, but this carbon fiber 2-seater will nearly triple their efficiency to more than 343 miles per gallon equivalent. Its carbon fiber body looks very crash-worthy. Then there's Dutch firm Lightyear's 5-seat 4-wheel, 450-mile range, light aerodynamic car with 5 square meters of solar cells on top, 251 mile per gallon efficiency, and therefore it can add 8 miles of range per hour in the sun. So the charging infrastructure that other EVs must pay for, these super efficient vehicles aim to bypass. The same design principles apply to heavy vehicles. My team have helped Walmart's fleet of heavy trucks, the world's biggest civilian fleet, save half its fuel use per case in a decade, including smarter logistics. But better technology alone can profitably make heavy trucks at least 3 times more efficient, as one maker expects to prove this year. Airplane efficiency also can rise 3 to 5-fold, like these decade-old designs in the bottom row by Boeing, NASA, and MIT. Tesla's battery electric heavy truck, also due out this year, more than triples efficiency with 40% sleeker aerodynamics, lightweighting that offsets battery weight, and a 2-year payback. Then there's this flight-tested air taxi revealed last August that could fly nonstop from Austin to Paris with a 6th a business jet's operating cost of 1/8 its fuel use before electrification. A bigger version already designed could hold well over 20 seats and looks set to blow up aviation's business models. Oh, and there's more. 2 years ago, MIT and NASA tested this 14-foot long structure that's 98.3% lighter than a typical aircraft wing, with the strength of bulk elastomers, but the gossamer density of aerogel. It's tough, it's damage resistant, eliminating movable flight surfaces. Every part of its entire shape passively morphs to optimize continuously for real-time flight conditions, just like a bird's wing. Thousands of such identical shells or cells molded from engineering plastics or from alternatives 10 to 100 times stronger can be robotically assembled into an airplane of any desired shape, opening revolutionary prospects for lightweighting, aerodynamics, and lower cost. It's been prototyped as a car for Toyota, as an airplane for Airbus. It could make a vacuum balloon needing no helium, crush-proof, but buoyant enough in the atmosphere to lift 24 times the payload of a jumbo jet. Put some vacuum balloon in a lattice airframe to help carry improved batteries, and PV-powered zero-emission electric planes, thinks one inventor, might ultimately carry commercial payloads across oceans. So the only gas reserves unsellable for competitive reasons look bigger than the reserves unburnable for climate reasons, putting oil owners even more at risk from market competition than from climate regulation. The cost of getting autos completely off oil has fallen from $18 per saved barrel a decade ago to under $7 a barrel today, heading below zero in the next few years. So oil became uncompetitive even at low prices before it became unavailable even at high prices. With electricity, as with fuels, technology and design are both moving efficiency into fast forward. Prior lighting improvements are being swept away as LEDs in each decade get 30 times more efficient, 20 times brighter, 10 times cheaper. What else changes this fast? The rest of the energy transformation, modern renewables. LEDs backwards are PVs, photovoltaics, and solar and in aqua wind power costs have plunged below the dashed lines. The cost of fossil fuels fed into US power stations, often making old coal and gas and nuclear plants uneconomic just to run. The electricity revolution, though, is much more than that. It includes shifting from molecules and atoms to bits and packets, from hardware to software, from hierarchies to networks. Electricity is changing from centralized, supply-focused, fossil and uranium-fueled and brittle to distributed, customer-focused, renewable, and resilient. Perhaps its deepest change is how the information age informs, enables, and organizes customers to take power into their own hands. You know, it's wise to sell customers what they want before someone else does. Customers are figuring out they can buy a lot fewer electrons, use them more productively and timely, produce their own, and even trade them with each other. For example, Dutch customers can buy renewable electricity directly from other customers on this peer-to-peer website of Van de Bron, literally from the source. My friend bought his electricity from the guy in the upper left photo because the price was right in magenta. It is a really cute piglet. Then he got a long handwritten Christmas card from his electricity supplier. What big utility can dream of such customer intimacy? Indeed, powerful disruptors are converging on the electricity industry from at least 8 directions. These 8 Pac-Men of the apocalypse move fast. They don't just add, they exponentiate. They're not lone wolves. They hunt in packs. They multiply quickly, and they can gobble half of utility revenues in this decade. Together, they're creating an alien competitive landscape faster than most utility cultures can cope. 7 years ago, all central power plants were called dinosaurs. And the full quote is, too big, too inflexible, not even relevant for backup power in the long run. Who said that? It wasn't Greenpeace. It was Union Bank of Switzerland. Now there's a new wave of Pac-Men coming over the hill and more behind them. Renewables in 2020 were 90% of the world's total net additions of generating capacity. And the International Energy Agency predicts about 95% over the next 5 years because, says Bloomberg, last year renewables became the cheapest bulk power source in 90% of the world, soon in all. In the US, our wholesale electricity prices in Aqua now widely exceed the average long-term contract prices of wind in blue, solar in orange. Those are temporarily subsidized, but less than non-renewables. In unsubsidized world markets, renewables at or below $30 a megawatt hour, the diamonds, keep falling through 20 to now 17 or less, even 13. And in this decade, they should reach 10 or less. Modern batteries included in the filled squares are already cheaper than gas peakers. Bloomberg finds variable renewables plus backup, which could be renewable, non-renewable storage or demand side, are now the cheapest way to meet a steady load, dethroning so-called baseload thermal plants. The Paris Agreement's 1.5 Celsius degree aspirational goal would require 80% of 2010 coal-fired electric generation to stop by 2030, closing one plant a day to 2040 and virtually all by 2050. But renewables' new market prices make this profitable without counting mitigation benefits. This mid-2020 study examined 2,500 coal-fired power plants, 95% of the global fleet, and found that 39% of that coal capacity costs more just to run in 2020 than new renewables with battery storage, rising to 60% next year, 73% in 2025, and even faster, as you see in the middle row, in China and India. So using efficiently structured financial instruments to close and replace all coal plants now with modern renewables, including battery storage, would thus be cost neutral in 2 years and would save over $100 billion a year by 2025, just in private internal cost. Gas comes next. New and old combined cycle gas plants no longer have a business case, even with fracked gas. Their market is collapsing because all their outputs, energy and capacity, and ramping and flexibility, and ancillary services like voltage and frequency stability, can all be provided faster, better, and cheaper by locally customized carbon-free clean energy portfolios, melding demand-side renewable and storage assets. This could strand over $100 billion of planned US gas plants and $500 billion of gas supply to fuel them. Investors have taken note. How could these moving parts fit together, say in Texas, whose grid, of course, has no big hydro dams and is only 1% interconnected outside the state? Well, a 2050 summer weeks expected ERCOT load shape can get much smaller and less peaky with profitably efficient use, with at least a 10% real return, say the National Academies. Then we can make 86% of the annual electricity with a combination of wind and photovoltaics, and the other 14% from dispatchable renewables. This 100% renewable supply can then match the load by putting surplus electricity into two kinds of distributed storage that are worth buying anyway: ice storage, air conditioning, and smart charging of electric autos, and then recovering that distributed storage when needed and filling the last gaps with unobtrusively flexible demand. So then you have 100% renewable electricity every hour of the year with no bulk storage and with only about 5% left over, maybe to make hydrogen. So the economics should be excellent even at today's prices, let alone lower future prices. And some grid operators are already doing such choreography today. Germany and Britain are half renewably powered. The whole European Union was 38% renewably powered last year, surpassing fossil or nuclear generation. Denmark expects to be 86% renewably powered this year. Scotland, 100%. They almost made it last year. And already they and some other European countries with modest or no hydropower are meeting about half to 3/4 or more of their electric needs from renewables, adding no bulk storage, and with superior reliability. For Denmark and Germany, about 20 or 25 times as good as ours. The ultra-reliable former East German utility, 50 Hertz, was 60% wind and solar powered in 2019. The CEO said they could do 60 or 70% without adding bulk storage. Now they're targeting 100% renewables, all reliably integrated by 2032. So as my colleague Clay Stranger says, the operators have learned to run these grids the way a conductor leads a symphony orchestra. No instrument plays all the time, but the ensemble continuously makes beautiful music. And just to underline how this is real and now, last year, the maximum percentage of Germany's electricity demand met by variable renewables, PV and wind power, the red dots, exceeded 50% in almost every week and ranged from 80 to nearly 100% at some point during about half of those weeks. Their nuclear and coal phase outs continued, the lights stayed on. What can I say? They're German engineers, but we have good ones too. Now, why did the lights stay on in Texas in mid-February? These graphs show in two different styles how the state's electric supply in early and late Feb had normal operation with wind in green, solar in yellow, whenever available, displacing gas in light brown and coal in dark brown. But mid-month brought 4 days of blackouts, perhaps the state's costliest disaster ever. Most analyses published focus on the supply side, how 2 February storms strained and then shriveled Texas's bountiful gas supply by freezing on winterized infrastructure, while many electric generators also froze, and then there were interactions between those systems. So for whatever reason, gas plant output fell 17 gigawatts, coal 4, nuclear 1, just missing 3 more, becalmed and frozen wind 13 from nameplate rating, snow covered solar 1. But the resulting coincident generating shortfall of 34 gigawatts, 21 of it thermal, exposed technical and institutional and governance flaws that mattered only because of a huge and largely unnoticed demand event. Intense cold boosted normal loads by an estimated 35 gigawatts of peak electric heating load. That is nearly twice the maximum load ERCOT shed. It's twice the lost gas-fired generation. It's more than the total shortfall in supply. It's nearly half the 77 gigawatt total peak demand that if met would have been 2 gigawatts over the summer record. These vast heating loads came from an often inefficient building stock, half of it housing, that's 2/3 electrically heated. In extreme weather, this fragile combination risks hypothermia or heat stroke, and it endangers all Texans' electric and gas supplies. Now, 2/3 of Texas homes were built before there was a state building code. Half have big air leaks and little or no wall insulation, limited attic insulation, single glazing. The blackouts could also have been abated, maybe even averted, by asking Texans the day before to turn thermostats and water heaters way down and appliances off, drain their pipes into containers, leave those out to freeze, then put them back into unplugged refrigerators and freezers to preserve food. But customers were only asked late and vaguely and ineffectually to conserve energy, so they didn't know how to help, nor that they held so much power in their hands. Despite days of advance notice from weather forecasters and gas markets, supply and summer-focused state institutions proved unprepared to sustain interlocked supplies or to tell retail customers how to mobilize a decisive behavioral rapid response. Instead, leaders blamed each other and scapegoated renewables. Oh, so how did those perform? Well, wind and solar were initially blamed 128 times by Fox News in 2 days for triggering the ERCOT disaster. So was the Green New Deal, not yet adopted anywhere. But take a look at the aqua line at the bottom. It shows how wind and solar power actually met ERCOT's 2.1 gigawatt extreme winter peak average expectation for all but 10 hours, constrained much more by expected and actual low wind speeds than by freezing, but overperforming throughout the rest of the blackout week. Meanwhile, the red curve shows that thermal capacity, thermal fell from 70 to 45 gigawatts in a few hours, a much bigger unpredicted failure. ERCOT initially reported 16 to 18 gigawatts of wind outage, later revised to 13, but that only meant production below full nameplate rating. But February is normally a low wind month, so ERCOT's forecast actually included only 7.1 average gigawatts of wind power. That's average, or 1.8 gigawatts in the extreme winter peak forecast, plus 0.3 gigawatts solar. So renewables underperformed the contingency expectations by at most 1.4 gigawatts for 1 hour, 18 hours into the outage, while over 30 gigawatts of thermal capacity was down. Now, of course, winterizing the wind turbines could have been a smart investment to earn astronomical prices in the 80-hour crisis, as Chris Clack's new VCE analysis suggests, but that would have added none to a few gigawatts when most needed due to forecast and actual light winds. Meanwhile, under 6 or 8 inches of snow, the shallow pitched Austin PVs produced about 60% less on 15 and 16 Feb, then rebounded. ERCOT Solar produced 2 or 3 gigawatts, 15 to 18 Feb, then 4 or 5 the next week, while wind returned to a robust 12 to 20. So look who was most resilient. Now, for normal grid balancing, we have not just one way, bulk storage in magenta, but about 9 carbon-free ways to make the grid flexible, reliable, and renewable, sketched here in order of increasing cost. RMI is now nailing down the numbers. Your actual costs will vary, but notice that bulk storage comes last, not first. It's the costliest of these options, so we needn't wait for a storage miracle, though some are emerging, and the market isn't waiting. Some folks wonder, of course, how the grid can reliably, gracefully manage the rapid evening ramp up when solar output fades, just as folks get home and turn stuff on, the infamous dead armadillo curve, or duck curve in California. RMI's hourly simulation for ERCOT in summer 2050 solved this problem by systematically combining 8 kinds of demand response that add up to about 3 times more than previously assumed. They engage electric vehicles, home plug loads, residential and commercial hot water, plus heating and cooling controls. And together, pressed one too many buttons. And together, these can these can cut the summer daily load range in half, make renewables a third more valuable, save a quarter of the non-renewable capacity, and pay back in about 5 months. Now, meanwhile, electric auto sales are soaring on the left as battery costs plummet. By the way, the growth accelerated in 2020 on the left. Each trend drives the other. In the next few years, electric cars are going to cost no more to buy than gasoline cars, and good EVs are much nicer and cheaper to drive. These abundant cheap batteries on the right imply distributed solar everywhere, gas industry distress, the end of thermal power stations, vast distributed storage and demand flexibility, and maybe as much of the grid's becoming a stranded asset like telco copper. This prospect, of course, gives utility executives nightmares and venture capitalists sweet dreams. Ubiquitous electric vehicles mean this enormous storage and ancillary services resource that's now parked 96% of the time. You can already drive your charged up battery car to a soccer game in Amsterdam's Green Stadium, plug it in to help run the stadium, leaving ample juice to help get home with, and watch the game for free. The integrator that does this, the Zurich-based Mobility House, supplements those incoming cars with 148 stationary Nissan Leaf packs, 42% of them reincarnated in a second life, and all providing valuable grid services. In fact, the firm is building a 100 megawatt portfolio of stationary storage in Germany, Holland, and France. Here's the first 30 megawatts, all using battery packs that are in the EV business, but not in currently driving cars. And even 3 years ago, this integrator installed the first electric car approved as a power plant on the German grid, able to get paid for providing frequency stabilization services. Of 21 services that stationary or mobile batteries can provide, the Mobility House is already commercially active in 10 and launching 3 more. And a bidirectional EV in Europe is expected to yield $800 in annual operating profit to build on the original profit stream from EV-derived stationary storage. Their four-country revenue in the past 3 years has averaged €1,000 per battery per year, with 1,500 EVs, 15 megawatts under management, 120 sites, 4,500 spare or used batteries from 4 automakers totaling 35 megawatts. Watch this space, jump in, do it in Texas. Meanwhile, efficient and electric autos are morphing from PIGs, that is personal internal combustion gasoline steel-dominated vehicles, to SEALs, shareable electric autonomous lightweight service vehicles. These 2 changes in technology and 3 in business model are all simultaneous, mutually reinforcing, vigorously in play, and sped by smart policies and strong commercial ambitions in India and China. Meanwhile, designing cities around people, not cars, yields more vibrant, healthy, wealthy, and pleasant communities with 1/3 less concrete and 2/3 less driving. Now, incumbent energy suppliers feeling competitive threats understandably focus on the need for price to exceed cost. But many forget the other part of the business condition, that value must exceed price. If competitors offer a superior value proposition and run off with your revenues, it doesn't matter if you can profitably sell what your ex-customers are no longer buying. These energy transformations can flip markets with breathtaking speed. On Fifth Avenue in 1900, you have to look hard for the first car. 13 years later, you have to look harder for the last horse. The horse and buggy industry thought it would have many decades to adapt, but the Model T got 62% cheaper in 13 years. Car-owning households soared from 8 to about 60% in a decade, 3/4 financed by a General Motors and DuPont innovation called car loans. Well, today our solar modules just got 80% cheaper in 5 years. Batteries, 89% cheaper in 10 years. 3/4 of our rooftop solar is innovatively financed. Ford's and Edison's industries are merging to eat Rockefeller's industry. Thus, the pace of transformation is set not by incumbents, but by insurgents who are not inhibited by incumbents' business models, legacy assets, or cultures. Moreover, investors flee before customers do, because capital markets keenly sniff out disruption. And once they think you're in or even headed for the toaster, they don't wait for the toast to get done before they decapitalize you and invest in your successors. Already, trillions of dollars have prudently fled the fossil fuel industry as it hemorrhages capital, talent, and political influence. The world's top 16 listed hydrocarbon companies combined were recently worth less than Apple. Carbon Tracker investment analyst Kingsmill Bond explains capital markets' brutal logic in this way. He says any fast-growing challenger will rapidly take all the growth in a slow-growing market. And as a rule of thumb, incumbent sales will peak when the challenger gets to around 3% market share, as in these examples. Why? Well, because most investors seek growth, not mere size, and they try to sell just before sales peak and stagnation strands assets and competition drops prices. That's why the coal industry has lost 3/4 of its world market value, 99% of its US market value. But now this collapsing value is spreading to oil and coming next for gas. Peak nuclear power, peak coal, peak autos, auto sales, peak fossil power have already happened. More electric autos were sold in 2019 than the annual growth in total auto sales at their 2017 peak. So fueled autos are now in their 4th year of shrinking sales. Last year, global plug-in auto sales soared 43%, while total auto sales fell 14%. International Energy Agency says last year's pandemic slump undid energy's previous 4 years of growth and CO2's previous 9 years of growth. That's twice the total of all their previous drops since World War II, but renewables kept growing and even accelerated. So by the time demand recovers, if it does, renewables will probably have expanded enough to supply any future growth, tipping fossil fuels into permanent decline. Therefore, peak oil, peak fossil fuels, and peak CO2 emissions probably all happened in 2019. Here's what that looks like in a respected recent forecast. So go from the bottom up, the 3 wedges of coal in black, oil in red, gas in gray, they stagnated before the pandemic. Then last year, the pandemic's economic shock shriveled fossil fuels, while renewables, mainly wind and blue, solar and yellow, grabbed the capital. Now, total energy use may still rise a little, but wind and solar more more than supply all the growth. So fossil fuels, everything below the purple nuclear wedge, have turned from a growth engine into a sunset industry. And this news is speeding their delegitimization, decapitalization, crushing their value and their clout. Investors are rapidly shifting that capital to both efficiency and renewables. And they reinforce each other. Efficient use makes renewables gain share faster. Efficiency outcompetes fossil fuels sooner. In the past decade, world energy use grew only half as fast as in the previous decade. You can see this from the chart. Further speeding energy savings could accelerate the self-reinforcing capital flight from incumbents to insurgents. Some of that speed may come from deeper, cheaper energy savings through integrative design. Its contagious, visually transmissible ideas might spread at the speed of YouTube and Twitter, perhaps rivaling even the speed of scaling solar power. One last thought. This global energy transformation isn't just fundamental, it's elemental. The first industrial revolution was the age of carbon, creating our prosperity and the world's mightiest industries from coal and oil and gas. But now that obsolete age of carbon is giving way to the modern age of silicon. Silicon microchips, telecoms, software turn people from isolated to networked, systems from dumb to smart, grids from analog to digital, potentially from dirigiste to democratized. Silicon power electronics make electricity interconvertible and precisely applicable, replacing fiery molecules with obedient electrons. And silicon solar cells enable the ascent of energy from mining the fires of hell to harvesting the breath and radiance of heaven. So our responsibility and opportunity is to help enable the new energy system, not protect the old, to build back better, to move fast and fix things. So the global energy transformation can move at the pace and cost of design and of software, not of infrastructure, and can be not constrained by the inertia of incumbents, but sped by the ambition of insurgents, like many of you. Thank you all for your good work and your kind attention.
Thank you, Amory. I think we would, if we were in person, would all join me in thanking you sincerely for this great presentation. I do have someone asking if the slides could be made available. I think we'll be asking all of the panelists and you, Amory, if we might be able to make the slides available on our UT website. You might consider whether that's okay, and we would greatly appreciate it. I have a question that came through the Q&A from Dave Tuttle, and I want to suggest that other folks raise their hand so that I can see the ordering quickly, easily, but I will read out the first question, which came from actually my PhD graduate, Dave Tuttle. Can you, Amory, please provide more background as to why China is still building coal plants with the cost trends of alternatives that you have stated?
Sure. Let me actually go back to a slide. It's not one I showed, but I think it's one I have. Let me just see if that will show up here. Yeah. Oh dear, no, yeah, down to the lower right corner. So Bloomberg says in the 2025 mid case, based on projects now being planned and financed, onshore wind costs less than half as much as new nuclear, and non-tracking solar is even cheaper than that. So if you actually look at the 14th five-year plan and the most recent announcements from the National Energy Administration.
In China, you mean? The National Administration in China, correct?
Yes, of China, yes.
Yes, okay.
Which actually sponsors RMI's Beijing office. We're very active in energy there. You will find that, yes, they are still building coal plants because of pressure, not from the central government, which doesn't like this at all, but from provincial governors and municipal mayors who want to protect jobs or meet their GDP growth targets. And they do that by doing what they are good at and have done before. But the run hours of the existing coal fleet keep dropping. I think they just dropped 2 percentage points rather in the past year. They're well below half now, and they're losing money. More of them are going broke. So the coal plants being built are all pre-stranded assets, and it's just a question of bureaucratic momentum and the political complexities of China. There's an old proverb, 天高皇帝远, heaven is high and the emperor is far away. So we do our thing in our province, Beijing's way over there. We don't pay so much attention. And it's also very clear if you look at headlines in the past few weeks that with the 14th five-year plan now coming out, continuing the efficiency of renewables strength of the 13th and even intensifying it, that the investment is shifting very much toward renewables just because they're cheaper. And away from nuclear and coal. Even though they're bureaucratically powerful, I would just note that China doubled its renewable additions in capacity last year and added last year more wind power than the world had added the previous year. It's just extraordinary. And there's more to come beyond that. I think the economics are winning over the political machinations.
Super. I do not see any other substantive questions yet. We might get one or two, but I have an observation for you, Emery. I am continually frustrated at people presenting Denmark as a high renewable place, particularly since it's in fact embedded into two separate interconnections. So it's really one Denmark. So that's the first minor issue. But the much more major issue is that it is streets behind West Texas. And you didn't show West Texas on your picture. West Texas beats Denmark, beats Germany, beats every other place in the world. And just before you object to it, West Texas is 4 times bigger than Denmark and has multiple times the capacity. So as a friendly amendment for your future discussions, I would like you to add West Texas as the renewables powerhouse of the world.
Oh, I could have added chunks of several US states that would be very impressive. West Texas is a terrific example. And it is quite true that Denmark uses the Nordic hydro battery and the strong German grid. That said, what they've done is quite remarkable and built a world-class export industry. I think it's an especially interesting example because the East Danish wind operators are now selling firm wind power into the hourly day-ahead auction, just as if they were running peakers, because their wind forecasting has proven to be so accurate that they have more confidence that they will deliver the contracted amount of wind at the appointed hour tomorrow than the grid operators have that when they push the button, their peaker will start.
Super. Perhaps we'll get there as well. I have another question for you. This is from John Dernbach. What are the 3 top things the federal government, I think we're talking US federal government, should do to accelerate the transition to energy efficiency?
Well, let me pick ones that they're not already doing.
Yes, fair enough.
I think one would be to strongly encourage the 26 states that still reward utilities for selling more energy and penalize them for cutting your bill to do decoupling and shared savings or an equivalent reform that makes the utility indifferent to how much energy it sells, but lets them keep part of whatever it saves the customers. That alignment of customer and provider interest has miraculous effects on utility culture and behavior, and they make more money at less risk. So EEI and AGA both back it, but many states are very slow to adopt. Second, I would like to see for cars and probably heavy trucks and maybe airplanes, a fee-based system, which can be size and revenue neutral. So when you go to buy a new vehicle, you pay a fee or get a rebate, which and how big depends on how efficient it is compared with that size, class, and type. So you get to choose the one you want. You're not pushed to buy a different size or type than you want, but you can apply a social discount rate to your private purchasing decision. And that means that whether to buy an efficient car would no longer be as unimportant as whether to buy floor mats. You're no longer applying a 60-odd% real consumer discount rate implicitly to your decision, but you're looking at the full life cycle value just as society should and does. Third, I think it's time in aviation and perhaps in other spheres to do something that has been done many times for eliciting very efficient appliances. It's called a golden carrot. You get together a gang of large customers. So in aviation, start with Pentagon, FedEx, DHL, UPS, the major lessors, major airlines. You probably think of some more. And collectively, they commit that whoever first brings them a, say, 4 or 5x efficiency airplane meeting all requirements, we will collectively buy X copies a year for Y years at price Z. We just took away your market risk. Go for it. And there will be a consolation prize for the runner-up. So you're then unbundling buying innovation from buying airplanes. You're greatly changing the risk appetite of both buyers and sellers and changing the culture and eliciting your best innovators, and therefore getting off the 2% a year incremental improvement that would take us a human lifetime to commercialize the airplanes developed 10 years ago that you saw in one of those slides, and indeed do better than that. Now we have one with 8x efficiency from full laminarization, which is really remarkable, and more to come after that. So I think it's really time to get American innovation into high gear, and a golden carrot would be a great way to do that in an understandably conservative and cash-strapped sector.
Super. One final very quick question, but you'll become a stock tipster if you give the answer. What is going, it's coming from Perry Siashansi, what is going to happen to the market cap of big oil?
Market cap of?
Big oil companies, large oil companies, the majors, let's say.
Oh, it already started to happen. As I mentioned, the 16 biggest listed hydrocarbon companies in the world were recently worth less put together than Apple. Capital is fleeing, and capital is right to flee. Of course, there are short-term fluctuations in actual or perceived value, and there will be noise, but it's hard to see those as winning industries. Some that have gotten out front on trying to turn into a different kind of company may make it. And the obvious contenders would include, I am not a stock tipster, I'm not giving stock advice. For example, Equinor, Total, Repsol, BP, Shell. It's really hard to turn those super tankers quickly, and it's not clear whether they'll be able to get good at doing a lot of little things, not just a few big things. Some of their big project skills are obviously applicable to things like offshore wind and certain geotechnical projects, geothermal and such, but it's not a very bright future. And I've been trying for 30 years to put trim tabs on the rudders of those companies because they have a lot of remarkable skills. But typically this kind of disruption comes from the outside and many of the incumbents don't survive it because they don't or can't move fast enough. It's more a cultural than a technical or economic issue. So I've written some on that, including one for Shell, the one demand side chapter in the 40 odd chapters of a book they put out some years ago called The Colors of Energy.
Indeed. And with that, I would like to, on behalf of the audience, thank you, Amory. It was a spellbinding, some of the comments underline, spellbinding and amazing presentation. Really appreciate your sharing that with our audience. I will clap on behalf of everybody.
Thank you.
And I would again like to thank not only you, but also our panelists and our attendees. It's been a great day. I do hope next year we will be returned from the straits of pandemic and can have our next Austin Electricity Conference live and in person in Austin. And I will be very pleased to invite everyone to visit us in Austin and enjoy a breakfast taco or two. So with that, thanks to you, thanks to the panel, thanks very specifically to our folks who helped behind the scenes, and signing off. Thank you. Bye-bye.